Viewer discretion is advised. Of all the animals, man is the only one that is cruel. He is the only one that inflicts pain for the pleasure of doing it. Mark Twain. Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today's video is on the Toolbox killers. I want to tell you a spooky story, but this isn't your typical ghost story. Unfortunately, in today's story, the horror is all too real. It took place on the night of October 31st, way back in 1979. Shirley Lynette Ledford, 16, accepted a ride home from two men, one of whom she likely recognized as a customer at the restaurant where she worked. She was in the van just a few minutes before the men bound and gagged her. Over the next few hours, she would be viciously tortured and raped by both men, before being murdered and dumped in a suburban backyard north of Los Angeles. Shirley Lynette Ledford was the fifth victim of killers Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, who became known as the Toolbox killers because of their use of common household tools as implements of torture. The pair met in prison in San Luis Obispo in 1978. Bittaker was serving time for assault with a deadly weapon and Norris for a rape conviction. Both had extensive criminal records going back years before their fateful meeting. They bonded over their shared hatred of women and began making plans for a crime spree once they were released. Their goal was to kidnap, rape, and murder teenage girls of varying ages, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, and so on, and to capture audio and video recordings of their murders. Bittaker was paroled on November 15, 1978, and began making preparations, purchasing a 1977 GMC cargo van he dubbed Murder Mac. Norris was paroled a few months later, and the pair met up in February of 1979 to put their sadistic plans into action. For a few months, they cruised around the Los Angeles area doing trial runs, stopping to talk to teenage girls and take their pictures. They abducted their first victim in June of 1979. Her name was Cindy Schaefer. She was 16 years old, and she was hitchhiking home from a church youth group meeting when the men noticed her. They offered her a ride, but she declined, perhaps sensing danger, and continued walking towards her grandmother's house. The killers drove the van further up the road and parked, and Norris got out and pretended to be repairing the van, though he was actually just waiting for Cindy to walk by so that he could snatch her from the sidewalk. The killers drove Cindy to a fire road in the San Gabriel Mountains outside of the city, a place they had previously chosen as ideal location to commit their heinous crimes. They brutally raped the teenage girl and then argued about whether or not they should kill her. Worried she'd be able to identify them if they let her go, they decided to take her life. Bittaker held her down while Norris tried to strangle her, but he was unsuccessful. They switched and Bittaker tried instead, but he was also not able to manually strangle the girl. They looped a wire clothes hanger around her neck and tightened it with pliers until she finally died. They dumped her body down a nearby ravine. Her remains were never found. Just 2 weeks later, the sadistic killers would claim another victim. Andrea Hall was 18, and she was hitchhiking when she encountered the men. Ray Norris hid in the back of the van while Lawrence Bittaker offered the young girl a ride. Once Bittaker had gotten Andrea Hall into the van, he offered her a drink from the cooler in the back. She accepted and climbed into the back to retrieve it, where Norris was waiting to pounce on her. A struggle ensued, but eventually Norris was able to overcome the teenager, and she was bound and gagged. They drove down to the San Gabriel Mountains and parked further down the fire road from where they had dumped Cindy Schaefer just a few weeks earlier. They took turns raping Andrea Hall and forced the terrified girl to pose for Polaroid pictures. After giving her an opportunity to plead for her life, Bittaker thrust an ice pick into her ear, then flipped her over and jammed it into her other ear, stomping on the handle until it broke. Even after all of that, she was still conscious and alive, so he manually strangled her to death while throwing her body down a ravine. About 2 months later, on September 8, 1979, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were out looking for girls yet again. They spotted Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Jacqueline Lee Lamp, 13, sitting at a bus stop in Hermosa Beach. The girls had been hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway and had stopped at a bus stop to take a rest. The men offered a ride to the girls, which they accepted. Once they were in the van, the men offered marijuana, which the girls also accepted. After a few minutes, the girls realized that Bittaker was driving away from the beach towards the San Gabriel Mountains. They tried to protest, and Lamp even attempted to open the van's sliding door, but Norris hit her on the head with a bag of lead weights, rendering her unconscious. Lamp and Gilliam were bound and subdued, and the killers drove with them into the San Gabriel Mountains, just as they had done with the girls they had captured before. Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp were kept alive for 2 days, during which time they were subjected to torture, some of which the men photographed. Jackie Gilliam was raped repeatedly, but neither men had any sexual interest in Lamp. When the killers had tired of raping and torturing the girls, they murdered them. Leah Lamp was bludgeoned to death with a sledgehammer, and Jackie Gilliam was stabbed in each ear with an ice pick. When Jackie Gilliam's skeletal remains were recovered months later, pieces of the ice pick were still lodged in her skull. Shirley Lynette Ledford would be the last teenage girl to lose her life at the hands of Bittaker and Norris. Picked up on Halloween night in 1979, Ledford's rape, torture, and murder were recorded on audio tape by her killers. After they picked her up, the men bound the teenage girl and pulled onto a quiet side street. They turned on the tape recorder and took turns raping her, ordering her to scream as she was tortured. They used instruments you'd find in a household toolbox: pliers, a sledgehammer, an ice pick. From his death row prison cell, Lawrence Bittaker had signed letters "Pliers Bittaker," demonstrating his complete lack of remorse for his horrific crimes. Norris confided in an old prison buddy named Joe Jackson, telling him details of the rapes and murders he'd committed with Bittaker. Jackson believed these to be tall tales until Shirley Lynette Ledford's body was discovered. Jackson himself, a father of teenage girls, alerted the authorities. Between the murders of Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp and the murder of Shirley Lynette Ledford, the men had abducted a few girls who managed to escape. After Joe Jackson tipped them off, the surviving victims were able to positively identify their attackers from photo lineups. Police first arrested Norris on an unrelated parole violation. Realizing that police were onto them and hoping to spare his own life, Norris confessed to the crimes and agreed to testify against Bittaker, who was arrested and brought to trial. Bittaker's trial would last for a month. Among the evidence presented were more than 500 photographs, including photos of Jackie Gilliam and Andrea Hall. From inside of Bittaker's van, police had discovered tools, a book of police radio frequencies, Vaseline, necklaces belonging to 2 of the victims, and an audio tape of the torture and murder of Shirley Lynette Ledford. A 17-minute segment of his audio tape was played for the jury at Lawrence Bittaker's trial. The recording was so graphic and disturbing that several jurors cried while listening, and some specters ran out of the courtroom. In February of 1981, Lawrence Bittaker was found guilty of 5 counts of murder, as well as many other crimes including kidnapping and rape. He was sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin, where he remains to this day. From his cell on death row, Bittaker passed his time filing dozens of lawsuits, including one in which he sued the prison for serving him a broken cookie. As a result of these frivolous lawsuits, he was designated a vitiatious litigant, meaning that he could no longer file lawsuits without permission from a lawyer or a judge. These days, he keeps busy making custom greeting cards and writing his memoir. In exchange for his testimony, Ray Norris received a sentence of 45 years to life in prison. He is in prison near San Diego. Both men had been in prison more than twice as long as any other victims lived. Thank you for watching today's video. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. What paranormal or crime-related mystery would you like to see next? I hope you all have a good day.